The neon lights of New Singapore's diplomatic quarter cast strange shadows across Rena's crystalline skin as she huddled in the alcove of a closed storefront. The translucent tears rolling down her face caught the multicolored glow of advertising holograms, creating tiny prisms that scattered at her feet. As a Lysarian diplomat, she had been trained to maintain composure in any situation, but the message she'd just received had shattered her carefully constructed facade. The bustling streets continued their endless flow of human and alien traffic, none sparing more than a cursory glance at the crying alien in their midst. Hover cars hummed overhead, their paths creating a symphony of motion against the twilight sky. Rena pulled her ceremonial robes tighter around herself, the intricate patterns woven into the fabric, marking her status in Lysarian society, now feeling more like chains than badges of honor. Nathan Wells adjusted the strap of his medical kit as he made his way home from another long shift at the Interspecies Aid Center. His dark skin glistened with the lingering humidity of the tropical evening, his short-cropped hair still damp from his end-of-shift shower. 10 years of working with various alien species had taught him to notice details others might miss, like the subtle bioluminescent pulses of distress emanating from the Lysarian woman ahead. He could have walked past, like everyone else. His shift was over, and Lysarians were notoriously private about their emotional states. But something in the irregular pattern of her bioluminescence spoke of deep despair, and Nathan had never been good at ignoring suffering, regardless of species. "Excuse me," he said softly, approaching with the careful movements he'd learned were least threatening to Lysarian sensibilities. "I'm a medical worker at the IAC. Are you all right?" Rena's crystalline features shifted in surprise, the latticework patterns beneath her translucent skin flickering with uncertainty. Why would you stop?" Her universal translator gave her words a musical quality, though the underlying tremor was unmistakable. "Because you're in distress," Nathan replied simply, keeping a respectful distance. "And in my experience, sometimes having someone to talk to can help, even if they're a stranger. Especially if they're a stranger." A bitter laugh escaped her, sending ripples of dark blue through her bioluminescent patterns. "You humans, and your persistent need to involve yourselves in others' affairs. How do you know I won't consider your attention an insult to my status?" "I don't," Nathan admitted with a slight smile. "But I figured the potential benefit outweighed the diplomatic risk. Besides," he added, gesturing to her robes, "those patterns indicate you're from the house of eternal dialogue. Isn't conversation with other species part of your mandate?" Rena's patterns shifted to a surprised violet. "You can read Lysarian status patterns. Part of my job. Though I probably just butchered the proper term for your house." For the first time, a flicker of genuine amusement crossed her features, only slightly. "We are the house of perpetual understanding. Though perhaps we understand less than we claim." Her patterns darkened again. "I've just been informed that my house has revoked my diplomatic status. 20 years of service, ended because I suggested incorporating human medical techniques into our healing protocols." Nathan whistled low. "That seems extreme, even for traditional houses. There has to be more to it. Politics. Fear. The usual reasons we use to justify closing ourselves off from change." She studied him with multifaceted eyes. "Why are you really here, Nathan Wells? Surely you have better things to do than counsel a disgraced diplomat." "Honestly, because 10 years ago, when I first started at the IAC, a Lysarian healer stopped to help me when I was having a panic attack after losing my first patient. She didn't have to get involved in human affairs, but she did. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness echo far beyond their moment." Rena's patterns shifted through several colors before settling on a thoughtful azure. "The ripples of compassion transcend species, it seems." She straightened slightly. "I don't suppose you know of any establishments nearby that serve both human and Lysarian cuisine. If I'm going to burden you with my diplomatic crisis, I should at least offer sustenance in return." "Actually, I know just the place." Nathan smiled, offering his arm in what he hoped was an acceptable cross-cultural gesture. "Though I should warn you, Their attempt at fusion cuisine is either brilliant or horrifying, depending on who you ask. After today, I find myself increasingly interested in fusion. Rena's patterns sparkled with subtle humor as she accepted his arm. Neither of them noticed the shadowy figure watching from the rooftops above, or the quiet beep of a communication device activating. The restaurant, tucked away in one of New Singapore's quieter districts, was called Convergence. Its entrance was marked by an elegant holographic sign that shifted between Earth's classical languages and Lizarian light patterns. Inside, the lighting had been carefully calibrated to accommodate both human vision and Lizarian photoreceptors, creating an atmosphere that felt somehow both familiar and alien to both species. Nathan led Rena to a quiet booth where privacy fields would allow them to speak freely. The crystalline patterns beneath her skin had settled into calmer rhythms, though occasional flickers of turmoil still rippled through when she thought he wasn't watching. The owner is actually a former Lizarian medical researcher, Nathan explained as they settled in. Dr. Vex caused quite a scandal when she decided to study human cuisine as a way to understand our biochemistry. Now she's famous for creating dishes that both species can not only eat but enjoy. Vex. Rena's patterns flashed with recognition. From the House of Measured Progress. I remember when she left. The conservative houses called it a betrayal of our culinary traditions. She paused as their server, a young human woman with careful movements that spoke of training in Lizarian etiquette, approached. After they ordered, a fusion dish for Nathan that combined earth spices with Lizarian protein structures, and a traditional Lizarian meal for Rena, they fell into surprisingly comfortable conversation. Nathan shared stories from the IAC, speaking of the challenges and rewards of adapting medical treatments across species barriers. Rena, her initial reserve gradually melting, began to explain the intricacies of Lizarian politics and the growing tensions between traditional and progressive houses. The truth is, she admitted, her patterns shifting to deeper blues. My suggestion about human medical techniques was merely the final excuse they needed. I've been questioning too many traditions lately, asking why we maintain barriers that seem to serve no purpose beyond preserving the status quo. Nathan leaned forward, genuinely intrigued. What kind of barriers? Did you know that Lizarian houses still maintain separate medical facilities in mixed cities, even though human hospitals have proven more efficient in treating certain conditions? Or that we refuse to share our knowledge of bioluminescent healing techniques, even though preliminary studies suggest they could revolutionize human neural therapy? Politics, Nathan sighed. We have our own conservative factions that resist any alien influence on medical procedures, though they've gotten quieter since Lizarian light therapy saved an entire ward of stroke patients last year. He paused. Wait, wasn't that at Singapore General? Rena's patterns flickered with a mix of pride and sadness. My project. Unofficial, of course. I convinced a few progressive healers to volunteer their services. The success should have opened doors, but instead, it threatened the established order, Nathan finished, made the traditionalists realize that cooperation might actually work better than isolation. Their food arrived, steaming dishes that bridged the gap between their species' culinary traditions. Nathan watched with amusement as Rena cautiously sampled his fusion dish, her patterns shifting through surprised pleasure at the taste. It's strange, she mused, how something as simple as sharing a meal can feel so revolutionary. In my house, the idea of eating with other species was considered distasteful. And now I wonder how many other artificial barriers we maintain out of habit rather than necessity. How many opportunities for growth we miss because we're too afraid to reach across species lines. As they continued talking, neither noticed that the restaurant's other patrons had gradually cleared out, leaving only a few figures seated strategically near the exits. The privacy field around their booth had masked the subtle clicks of weapons being readied. The attack, when it came, was swift and coordinated. The privacy field shattered with a burst of disruptive energy, and armed figures in stealth suits materialized around them. Nathan's medical training kicked in as he assessed the threat. 6 attackers, mixed species, military-grade weapons with identification markers carefully removed. But it was Rena who moved first. Her diplomatic robes shifted, revealing hidden defense mechanisms as her bioluminescence pulsed in aggressive patterns that momentarily disoriented their attackers. "Down," she shouted, pushing Nathan aside as energy bolts scared the wall behind them. Nathan rolled with the movement, his medical kit springing open to reveal emergency gear. He grabbed a canister of broad-spectrum sedative gas, thanking his habit of staying prepared for cross-species medical emergencies. They worked in surprising synchronization, Rena's defensive patterns creating openings that Nathan exploited with well-placed bursts of sedative gas. Her diplomatic training, it seemed, included more than just cultural etiquette. When it was over, their attackers lay unconscious, and the restaurant's security systems were finally activating, late enough to suggest deliberate interference. Rena's patterns had shifted to alert yellows and oranges as she examined one of the fallen attackers. "House of Crystal Judgment," she said grimly, indicating a barely visible tattoo. Religious fundamentalists who believe in maintaining absolute genetic and cultural purity. They usually focus on internal Lysarian affairs, though. This is unprecedented. Nathan was checking the attacker's vital signs, ensuring the sedative hadn't caused any dangerous reactions. Religious fundamentalists attacking a restaurant seems a bit extreme, even for purists. Not the restaurant. Rena's patterns darkened. Me, or rather, what I represent. They must have been tracking me since my dismissal, waiting to make an example of a corrupted diplomat. She turned to him, patterns shifting with concern. "I'm so sorry, Nathan. I never meant to endanger you." But Nathan was examining the attacker's weapons with growing concern. "These aren't just religious zealots, Rena. This equipment is military grade, and look at these neural disruptors. They're specifically calibrated for both human and Lysarian physiology." Someone wanted to send a message to both our species. Their eyes met across the unconscious forms of their attackers, both realizing that what had started as a simple act of kindness had stumbled onto something far more complex. The barriers between their species, it seemed, concealed deeper conflicts than either had suspected. The Interspecies Aid Center's secure wing hummed with activity as Nathan and Rena sat in a private consultation room, surrounded by holographic displays showing security footage from the restaurant attack. Director Patel, a veteran of human-alien relations, studied the footage with increasing concern, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun. The weapons' signatures match recent thefts from both human military installations and Lysarian house arsenals, she explained, highlighting relevant details in the holographic display. Someone's been quietly arming extremist groups on both sides. The question is why? Rena's patterns rippled with troubled thoughts. The House of Crystal Judgment has always opposed integration, but they've never had access to this level of technology. Someone's backing them. Nathan, who had been examining medical scans of their attackers, looked up. There's something else. Their neural patterns show signs of chemical enhancement, military-grade combat drugs that work on both human and Lysarian physiology. That kind of cross-species pharmaceutical development is supposed to be impossible without extensive cooperation between our medical communities. Impossible without official cooperation, Rena corrected, her patterns shifting to thoughtful amber. But what if someone's been conducting unauthorized research? The kind that would require access to both human and Lysarian medical data. Director Patel's eyes narrowed. Like the data that would have been collected during your joint medical projects. The ones that got you dismissed. Not just mine. Rena's patterns pulsed with sudden realization. Every cooperative medical initiative between our species in the past decade. Each one was shut down by traditionalists, but not before generating valuable research data. Nathan stood, pacing the room as pieces started falling into place. And each shutdown pushed our species further apart, reinforcing the barriers between us. What if that was the point? What if someone's been manipulating both sides? Their discussion was interrupted by an urgent alert. The holographic displays shifted to show breaking news. Simultaneous protests had erupted outside human and Lissarian medical facilities across New Singapore. Crowds on both sides demanded an end to all cross-species medical cooperation, citing risks of contamination and cultural degradation. "This is too coordinated to be spontaneous," Director Patel muttered, scanning the reports. "Someone's taking advantage of the restaurant attack to push their agenda." Rena's patterns had shifted to deep crimson, a sign of intense concentration that Nathan had learned to recognize. The timing is suspicious. Just as we're uncovering evidence of unauthorized medical research, public opinion is being turned against the very cooperation that might expose it. "We need to investigate those medical projects," Nathan said, already pulling up records on his medical terminal. All the ones that were shut down, all the data that was supposedly destroyed. A soft chime interrupted him as the door slid open, revealing a tall Lissarian male in the formal robes of the House of Eternal Wisdom. "That won't be necessary," he announced, his patterns displaying authority and barely concealed disdain. "Diplomatic healer Rena, by order of the combined houses, you are to cease all contact with human medical personnel immediately." Healer Voss, Rena's patterns flickered with recognition and something else. "Warning. I no longer answer to the combined houses. They made that quite clear when they dismissed me." "Your dismissal has been temporarily suspended," Voss replied, his patterns smugly neutral. "The houses have decided to show mercy, given your confused state. You will return with me for purification and reassignment." Nathan stepped forward, medical instincts alerting him to subtle irregularities in Voss's movements. "She's currently under IAC protection pending investigation of an armed attack." "Human," Voss cut him off. "This is an internal Lissarian matter. Your involvement is neither required nor welcome." But Rena had shifted position slightly, her patterns now matching Nathan's suspicions. "Interesting timing, Voss. The houses have never reversed a dismissal in their 1,000-year history. Why start now? Perhaps they recognize the error. Or perhaps," Rena interrupted, her patterns now pulsing with controlled anger, "they realized I was close to uncovering something. Something about unauthorized medical research and convenient project shutdowns. Something about who's really been manipulating events." Voss's patterns shifted microscopically, a tell that most humans would have missed, but Nathan's medical training had taught him to recognize signs of stress across species. His hand slowly moved toward the emergency alert on his medical console. "You always were too clever for your own good," Voss said softly, his formal robes shimming to reveal something far more tactical underneath. "We could have handled this quietly, given you a chance to serve a greater purpose. Like your other test subjects?" Nathan asked, noting how Voss's attention split between them. "The ones you've been experimenting on while pushing our species apart. Progress requires sacrifice." Voss's patterns now displayed open hostility. "The barriers between species exist for a reason. Mixing our sciences, our medicines, it violates natural law. We sought to prove that, to demonstrate the catastrophic results of cooperation. And when the evidence is revealed, when the public sees the monstrous outcomes of human Lissarian medical experiments, they'll demand complete separation." Rena finished, her patterns now battle-ready. "No more cooperation, no more shared knowledge. No one to notice unauthorized research continuing in secret. A pity you won't live to share that insight," Voss said, raising his hand to reveal an implanted neural disruptor. But Nathan had already triggered the emergency alert, and Rena was moving before Voss could fire, her diplomatic training once again proving more combat-oriented than expected. The fight was brief but vicious. Voss's enhanced abilities made him formidable, but he hadn't counted on facing both a desperate Lissarian and a human doctor who knew exactly where to target cross-species pressure points. When security forces burst in, they found Voss unconscious, and Nathan applying emergency first aid to Rena's minor injuries. "You know," Nathan said as he treated a crystalline abrasion on her arm, "for someone who supposedly specialized in diplomacy, you're surprisingly good at combat." Rena's patterns flickered with tired amusement. And for someone dedicated to healing, you know an impressive amount about incapacitating people. Cultural exchange at its finest, he grinned, though his expression sobered quickly. This isn't over, is it? Voss was just one part of a larger conspiracy. No, she agreed, her patterns resolving into determined blues and silvers. But at least now we know what we're fighting. And who we're fighting it with. Her hand found his, squeezing gently. Thank you, Nathan, for stopping to help a crying stranger. Anytime, he replied softly, aware that Director Patel was watching them with knowing concern. Though maybe next time we can uncover a massive conspiracy over dinner without the armed combat. Where would the fun be in that? Rena's patterns sparkled with genuine warmth, even as emergency teams swarmed around them and news of Voss's arrest began spreading through official channels. They had struck a blow against those who would keep their species apart. But the real battle, the fight for understanding and cooperation, was just beginning. The secure medical lab deep within the IAC complex had become their base of operations over the past week. Holographic displays covered the walls, showing connections between supposedly unrelated incidents, medical project shutdowns, protest movements, mysterious equipment thefts. At the center of it all, Nathan and Rena worked in seamless coordination, their growing trust evident in every shared glance and finished sentence. Another medical facility was attacked last night, Director Patel announced, entering with fresh data crystals. This time, it was the Lysarian Healing Center in District 7. The attackers appeared human, used Lysarian weapons, and left behind evidence suggesting human extremist groups. Too perfect, Rena's patterns rippled with frustration. Just like the Lysarian attackers who hit the human clinic in Sector 4, using stolen human weapons. Nathan looked up from the medical data he was analyzing. They're escalating, trying to provoke a complete breakdown in relations before we can expose them. He highlighted a section of genetic data. Look at this. Every attack victim shows traces of the same cross-species pharmaceutical compounds we found in our restaurant attackers. They're using their own test subjects as soldiers, Rena concluded, her patterns darkening with anger, creating incidents to prove that cooperation between our species leads to disaster. The secure medical lab deep within the IAC complex had become their base of operations over the past week. Holographic displays covered the walls, showing connections between supposedly unrelated incidents, medical project shutdowns, protest movements, mysterious equipment thefts. At the center of it all, Nathan and Rena worked in seamless coordination, their growing trust. The lab's secure door slid open, admitting a junior analyst who handed Director Patel an urgent message crystal. Her face darkened as she read it. They're moving faster than we thought. The Purification Initiative is calling for an emergency session of the Interspecies Council. They're going to present evidence of failed genetic experiments resulting from human-Lysarian cooperation. The Interspecies Council chamber formed a perfect sphere, its architecture designed to represent the unity of all sapient species. Today, that symbolism felt particularly poignant as emergency medical teams from both human and Lysarian societies worked frantically to stabilize the growing number of victims. The degrading combat compounds had begun triggering catastrophic systemic failures, just as Nathan had predicted. Rena's patterns pulsed with controlled tension as she and Nathan moved among the patients, their combined knowledge allowing them to treat symptoms that would have baffled either species working alone. The council members watched from their elevated positions, their previous agenda forgotten in the face of the growing medical crisis. The compound degradation is accelerating, Nathan announced, checking readings on his modified medical scanner. We're seeing total cellular breakdown in both human and Lysarian victims. Traditional treatments from either species aren't enough. Because they were never meant to be, Rena added, her patterns shifting to emphasize key points as she addressed the council. These victims are proof of unauthorized experimentation, attempts to combine our medical sciences without proper understanding or cooperation. A towering figure rose from among the initiative's representatives. High Commander Jareth of the Human Purity League, his scared face twisted with contempt. "You prove our point, alien. This tragedy demonstrates the dangers of mixing our species' knowledge. These victims are the inevitable result of corruption." "No," Nathan interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of medical certainty. "They're the result of fear. Fear of true cooperation, fear of understanding each other. These people are dying because someone wanted to prove that our species couldn't work together. But look around you. Look at how many lives we've saved when we actually try." The chamber's holographic systems activated, displaying case after case of successful human-Lizarian medical cooperation. Lives saved, breakthroughs achieved, impossibilities overcome when knowledge was shared instead of hoarded. "This is propaganda," snarled Executor Nive of the Crystal Judgment, her patterns radiating hostile intent. "Human deception. The only deception," Rena cut in, her patterns blazing with truth, "is the lie that we must remain apart. That understanding each other somehow diminishes us. Look." She gestured to where she and Nathan had been treating patients, her patterns synchronizing with his movements in a display of perfect cooperation. "Every victim we've stabilized required both human and Lizarian techniques, working in harmony. The treatments you call corruption are the only thing keeping them alive. Because the damage was caused by improper hybridization," Nathan added. "Not because cooperation is impossible, but because it was attempted in secret, without the open exchange of knowledge that could have prevented these failures." A commotion near the chamber's entrance drew attention as Director Patel arrived with the security team. "We've completed our investigation of the initiative's facilities. Evidence of illegal experimentation, unauthorized weapons development, and deliberate sabotage of legitimate cooperation efforts. They created the very corruption they claimed to fight against." High Commander Jareth's hand moved toward a concealed weapon, but Rena had already noted his subtle shift in stance. Her diplomatic combat training proved itself once again as she moved to intercept him, her patterns disorienting those initiative members who tried to intervene. Nathan's medical expertise guided his response to their enhanced agents' attacks, targeting the weak points created by their unstable augmentations. Together, they contained the situation before it could escalate into bloodshed, their combined abilities demonstrating exactly what they had been arguing for. The attack victims, Rena's patterns pulsed with realization. When they start dying from compound degradation, it will appear to confirm everything the initiative has been claiming. Nathan ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Unless what? Unless we can prove that the degradation itself is evidence of the conspiracy. These compounds, they're not failing because cross-species medicine is impossible. They're failing because they were rushed, improperly tested. If we can demonstrate that proper cooperation between our medical sciences could have prevented this. Rena's patterns shifted to thoughtful blue. We'd need access to the Council Chamber's medical scanning systems, and a way to analyze the data from both human and Lizarian perspectives simultaneously, which would normally be impossible. Director Patel noted, given the current restrictions on medical cooperation. Nothing about us is normal. Nathan gestured between himself and Rena. We've already proven that cooperation works. Maybe it's time to show everyone else. Rena's patterns sparkled with sudden inspiration. The ancient protocols. Nathan, remember how you could read my house patterns when we first met? Knowledge that was supposedly restricted. Part of my job, he shrugged. The IAC believes in understanding the species we work with. Exactly. Despite all the artificial barriers, genuine understanding still happens. The real corruption isn't in cooperation, it's in forcing us apart. She turned to Director Patel. We need access to the council session. They'll never allow a dismissed diplomat and a human doctor to address the full council, Patel warned. They won't have a choice, Nathan said grimly, checking another medical alert. The compound degradation is accelerating. By the time the council meets tomorrow, the first victims will be showing symptoms. They'll need every available medical expert, regardless of species. And we'll need something else, Rena added, her patterns showing fierce determination. Everything you have on successful human-Lysarian cooperation, every life saved, every breakthrough achieved when we work together instead of apart. The truth about what happens when we stop letting fear drive us apart. Director Patel studied them both, the human doctor and the Lysarian diplomat, who had forged something unprecedented simply by choosing to trust each other. I'll make the arrangements, but you should know, the initiative won't let this happen without a fight. Let them try, Nathan said softly, reaching for Rena's hand as her patterns aligned with his resolve. They wanted to prove what happens when our species come together. Well, they're about to find out. The lab's systems continued their quiet work as they prepared for the coming confrontation, but something had shifted in the atmosphere. Where there had been uncertainty, now there was purpose. Where fear had threatened to drive wedges between species, understanding had built bridges instead. Tomorrow would bring its own battles. But tonight, in this room, human and Lysarian stood united against those who would deny the power of connection. And it had all started with one simple choice: to stop and help someone in need. The Interspecies Council Chamber formed a perfect sphere, its architecture designed to represent the unity of all sapient species. Today, that symbolism felt particularly poignant as emergency medical teams from both human and Lysarian societies worked frantically to stabilize the growing number of victims. The degrading combat compounds had begun triggering catastrophic systemic failures, just as Nathan had predicted. Rena's patterns pulsed with controlled tension as she and Nathan moved among the patients, their combined knowledge allowing them to treat symptoms that would have baffled either species working alone. The council members watched from their elevated positions, their previous agenda forgotten in the face of the growing medical crisis. The compound degradation is accelerating, Nathan announced, checking readings on his modified medical scanner. We're seeing total cellular breakdown in both human and Lysarian victims. Traditional treatments from either species aren't enough. Because they were never meant to be, Rena added, her patterns shifting to emphasize key points as she addressed the council. These victims are proof of unauthorized experimentation, attempts to combine our medical sciences without proper understanding or cooperation. A towering figure rose from among the initiative's representatives. High Commander Jareth of the Human Purity League, his scared face twisted with contempt. You prove our point, alien. This tragedy demonstrates the dangers of mixing our species' knowledge. These victims are the inevitable result of corruption. No, Nathan interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of medical certainty. They're the result of fear. Fear of true cooperation, fear of understanding each other. These people are dying because someone wanted to prove that our species couldn't work together. But look around you. Look at how many lives we've saved when we actually try. The chamber's holographic systems activated, displaying case after case of successful human-Lysarian medical cooperation. Lives saved, breakthroughs achieved, impossibilities overcome when knowledge was shared instead of hoarded. This is propaganda, snarled Executor Nive of the Crystal Judgment, her patterns radiating hostile intent. Human deception, the only deception, Rena cut in, her patterns blazing with truth, is the lie that we must remain apart, that understanding each other somehow diminishes us. Look. She gestured to where she and Nathan had been treating patients, her patterns synchronizing with his movements in a display of perfect cooperation. Every victim we've stabilized required both human and Lysarian techniques, working in harmony. The treatments you call corruption are the only thing keeping them alive. Because the damage was caused by improper hybridization, Nathan added. Not because cooperation is impossible, but because it was attempted in secret, without the open exchange of knowledge that could have prevented these failures. A commotion near the chamber's entrance drew attention as Director Patel arrived with a security team. We've completed our investigation of the initiative's facilities. Evidence of illegal experimentation, unauthorized weapons development, and deliberate sabotage of legitimate cooperation efforts. They created the very corruption they claimed to fight against. High Commander Jareth's hand moved toward a concealed weapon, but Rena had already noted his subtle shift in stance. Her diplomatic combat training proved itself once again as she moved to intercept him, her patterns disorienting those initiative members who tried to intervene. Nathan's medical expertise guided his response to their enhanced agents' attacks, targeting the weak points created by their unstable augmentations. Together, they contained the situation before it could escalate into bloodshed, their combined abilities demonstrating exactly what they had been arguing for. In the aftermath, as security forces led away the initiative's leaders, the council chambers buzzed with urgent discussion. The evidence was undeniable, not just of the conspiracy, but of the power of genuine cooperation between species. The barriers between us, Rena addressed the council, her patterns now radiating calm certainty, were never about protection. They were about control, about maintaining power through artificial division. But true strength comes from understanding each other, from choosing to reach across those divisions. The initiative tried to prove that cooperation leads to corruption, Nathan added, standing beside her. Instead, they proved that it's the fear of cooperation that corrupts. Every victim we saved today, we saved together. Every breakthrough we've achieved came from choosing understanding over isolation. The Council's deliberations were swift and decisive. Emergency protocols were enacted, but not the ones the initiative had hoped for. Instead of separation, they'd mandated cooperation. Combined medical teams were authorized. Exchange programs were expanded. The barriers began to fall. Later, in the quiet of the IAC medical lab, Nathan and Rena took a moment to process everything that had happened. Her patterns created subtle dancing lights across the instruments as she turned to him. "You know what amazes me most about humans?" she asked, echoing their first real conversation. "Our rugged good looks and charming personality." Nathan suggested with a tired smile. "Your capacity to change everything by choosing to care." Her patterns shifted to colors he had learned to recognize as deep affection. One moment of kindness on a city street led to saving hundreds of lives and changing interspecies relations forever. He reached for her hand, feeling the subtle resonance between them. "I'd say it was worth stopping for." "They'll try again," she noted, practical even in victory. "Other groups, other fears. The barriers won't all fall at once. Then we'll face them together," Nathan replied simply, one act of understanding at a time. Her patterns sparkled with joy and determination as she sealed that promise with a gesture that transcended both their species' traditions, a meeting of hands and hearts, a connection that proved that boundaries only existed until someone was brave enough to cross them. Outside the lab's windows, the eternal twilight of New Singapore painted the city in shades of possibility. Somewhere in those streets, another moment of connection was waiting to happen. Another chance to prove that the greatest discoveries come not from staying safely apart, but from daring to understand each other. And it all began because someone stopped to help a stranger in need.